Be advised, the opinions and views of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Welcome to another episode of the June Alma Show. This is June Alma, and tonight we have another very interesting topic to talk about. It's a very controversial issue, and we are fortunate to have with us tonight a very distinguished guest who is an expert in diplomacy and specifically in international relations. And I believe that she is the exact person to consult when it comes to forwarding the position of the Philippines in the international table, but particularly in the UNCLOS. And so please do stay with us. We will introduce to you shortly our very distinguished guest. In the meantime, my co-anchor, Dr. Sen.Shahani, would like to say good evening to all of you. Che?
Yes, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the June Alma Show. Tonight, our guest will be a very special guest who has, as June has said, already been in government as well as local government and in the international arena as well. But she has also a very special private activity that she's going to reveal to us later on. Stay tuned.
Yeah, and actually, she has a very impressive, credentials, both personally and officially. She belongs to a long line of politicians and very distinguished politicians at that. Um, and she was formerly the senator and also a former ambassador to different countries, particularly in Romania and Australia. She was also she's also the sister of our former president, Fidel V. Ramos, and also a dutiful daughter to very distinguished parents too. The former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Narcisa Ramos, and her mother, who was a cousin of another former president, President Ferdinand Marcos. So she really belongs to a really, hardcore political line of political experts, and we are very proud because she belongs to this kind of politicians that are really with really good credentials. It's not just the typical politicians that we have lately been forwarding just on popularity, but her kind of political affiliation is one of really good grounding and really in the blood. So please welcome tonight. We are very fortunate to have with us the former senator and ambassador to Romania and Australia, the Honorable Leticia Ramos-Shahani. Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Georgie. Good evening, Dr. Che.
Evening,
Thank you for inviting me to this show, and it really is quite an experience because I've not been in TV shows for some time now, and so I'm glad to join you here tonight.
It's a pleasure, ma'am, and it's an honor that you're with us. Thank you. Yeah, like we have, bannered in the show earlier, we would like to get straight to business already during the bulk of the show. So we would like to start off by asking, these controversial topics. Today we are in the middle of all these tensions in the oceans around us, particularly, beginning with the Spratlys and now the Scarborough Islands. And please do tell us what actually is the history. I know this dates back to the time when the French have occupied and renounced and sort of abandoned the Spratlys Islands. And since you are, have studied in France, in Paris, France, for your doctoral degree, and you have also had some expertise in because you have drafted or authored a bill that codified the conduct of the fisherman's livelihood and regarding the marine resources. And so we would like to ask you, what do you think is the Philippine position now with regards to the situation in the
Well,
West Philippine Sea?
you're right in that when I was in the Senate and I I chaired the Committee on Foreign Relations. I authored and sponsored the passage of a bill, of a law, of a bill really, because it did not pass into the passage, to draw the outer limits of our archipelago. We are an archipelago, which means that we are a nation united by water rather than by land. And the Philippines, I think many school children don't know it, but we're 80% water and only 20% land. And maybe I grew up being conscious of the sea as a very young child because I was born in Lingayen, Pangasinan. And that is the West Philippine Sea.
Yeah.
we face it, and so when you grow up in a coastal town like Lingayen, you are really very conscious of the sea. When I had a cold or a cough, my mother would say, "Oh, you go by the seaside, and your cough will get well." Or else, if I was bitten by mosquitoes and many insects, she'd say, "You just go and dip yourself into the sea water, and your skin disease will get well." So your growing up was part of, the sea was really very much a part of my life. So when I was in the Senate and, I was elected during Cory's time, 1987, there was this bill already to draw the outer limits of the archipelago. Because if we gave that to the UN, you see, the show refers to the United Nations
Yes,
Convention
yes.
on the Law of the Sea. And that was one of the requirements if you were a state party to this convention, that you had to draw the outer limits of the archipelago. And that is important because it's too bad we don't have a map with us now, and maybe we should have had one. But you draw the baselines of the archipelago from the outer limits, from Batanes all the way to Tawi-Tawi. So you do not go into the coastal areas, but you draw them outside.
Yeah, yes.
So under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, we are entitled to a 200-mile exclusive economic zone.
I see.
And that really gives us a much wider area than the land. Can you imagine,
Yes,
200 miles exclusive economic zone from the outermost limits of Batanes, no? So it's very wide. And we have economic sovereign rights over these waters. In other words, no other country has the right to develop them economically except the Philippines.
I see.
Of course, there are other countries also like us, or archipelagos, like Indonesia is a much bigger archipelago than we are. Indonesia is composed of 13,000 islands. We're only 7,000. So you can imagine how big Indonesia is.
Yes. So you have mentioned about furthering the area, covering 200 nautical miles out of the islands in the Philippines. Now, has this been already really approved at the UNCLOS? Because apparently, I think there is some kind of a problem as to the implementation or the codification of the agreements that the different countries, the 162 countries that have come together to...
Well, the UNCLOS, it took 10 years for the international community to come up with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. You can imagine how problematical it was, no? So many arguments, because the UNCLOS represents the only maritime regime in the world which has been accepted by the international community of nations, that is the members of the UN. We have ratified it. And I like to remember that when I was still a junior officer, much younger than you are now, uh, I used to have the UN office in the DFA. And I would sign really every year to recommend to the Secretary of Foreign Affairs the list of delegations to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea in Caracas, Venezuela.
Oh,
And the leader of this
delegation.
Philippine delegation, whom we should really be proud of, is the late Senator Arturo Tolentino. He was the leader of that. And you had people like Jose Ingles, Estelito Mendoza, Mario Manansala of the Bureau of Fisheries, who really led the delegation. And it was the Philippine delegation which proposed the acceptance of the archipelagic doctrine in this Convention of the Law of the Sea, where we, as a group of islands, should have some special privileges. And after a long fight, we had to fight for that recognition. It was accepted, the archipelagic doctrine, where an archipelago should draw its baselines from the outermost limits of its land area.
However, ma'am, because of that 200 nautical mile extension from the boundaries of whatever islands or
Territorial, yeah.
shores or coastal areas we have, the problem I think arose from the fact that there are overlaps which occurred from extending the 200 nautical mile extension from other countries. That's why there are many claimants to
that's
Scarborough.
only in some parts, Dr. Che.
Yeah.
There are some parts which are not disputed. I mean, for instance, in along the Ilocos coast, and then on the eastern part, like Aurora, you know, the eastern side, no, of the Pacific.
Yes.
Aurora, for instance, Cagayan. That's not disputed. What is disputed is the one near Palawan, the Spratlys, no, the western side. And of course, Vietnam claims part of that. China,
There's Taiwan
Malaysia, and of course Indonesia. You know, no, Indonesia does not is not in the dispute, but that is now disputed because there are overlapping claims of the 200-mile exclusive economic zone, and as you know, I'm sure you've read it in the papers, the West Philippine Sea, the South China Sea, has a lot of resources under the sea. Oil, natural gas. And not only that, I mean, someone told me that it's like a living pharmacy. You know, you can get all of the elements there, potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium, may even gold, silver. I mean, this is an unexplored frontier.
Apart from the various marine biodiversity in the area.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we belong to the Coral Triangle, our country, you see, because the growth of corals in our country is so flourishing, and the variety of corals, you see.
Yes.
And then also the marine life. We are the sixth world's fishing country in the world. You know, we're very rich in fish resources.
Okay, so we have a lot more interesting topics to continue to talk about. In the meantime, we shall be back for a short break, after a short break. See you.